Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. But as I studied for this, we're talking about Elijah, I thought what came to my mind is this is the God of more than enough. In 1 Kings 17, we read about Elijah. It was a very crucial time in the history of Israel. It looked like the worship of the true God might be completely eliminated in the northern kingdom. The whole land seemed to have forsaken the one true God. And of all the thousands of Israelites, there are only 7,000 who remained that had not bowed a knee or kissed the hand of Baal. But these 7,000 were so paralyzed with fear, and they kept so quiet and still, that Elijah did not even know about them. So in the first verse of chapter 17, it says, Now Elijah the Tishbite, who was one of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. So he's telling him, he said, until I say so, you won't even have dew that falls on the grass. There will be nothing. And so it did not rain for that amount of time. But even in the book of James, in the New Testament, in the 5th chapter, we find where James is talking about the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availing much. And he refers to Elijah. He says, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain. And it did not rain in the land for 3 years and 6 months. Of course, this did not please Ahab, so he was out to get Elijah. God told him to go and hide by the brook Cherith. God told him he had commanded ravens to feed him there. Now, the escape to this brook was more than just for Elijah's protection. It was for Elijah to train him to depend on the Lord. The name Cherith comes from an ancient Hebrew root meaning to cut away, to cut up or cut off. So God must have needed to do some cutting in the life of Elijah during this period of time. Now, if you'll notice how God was leading Elijah step by step, he didn't lay out the whole plan all at once. I remember a book back in the 70s that was written by Stormy O'Mardian, or it might have been 80s, but back several years ago, Stormy O'Mardian wrote a book entitled Just Enough Light for the Step I'm On. God leads you and I one step at a time. If he gave us the whole plan, we would begin to put our own ideas on it and our ways. We would change it here and tweak it there. And pretty soon it wouldn't even look like the original plan that God had for us. So, he just gives us one step, enough light for the step that we're on. So we know that Elijah stayed by the brook, but it dried up. It may seem strange that God kept moving him from place to place, but if you'll notice, he learned something in every place. His trust and faith in God grew stronger and stronger. Now that the brook had dried up, it was time to move on. In verses 8 and 9, it says, Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called out to her and said, Please give me a little water in a jar that I may drink. So here we see where God told him to go to Zarephath, and he said he had commanded a widow to provide for him. Elijah could have thought this was an awfully strange thing to do. It might have made more sense to him to stay by the dried up brook, because all the widows he knew throughout the region were poor, and they needed looking after. They didn't have the means to provide for someone, but that's what God was telling Elijah to do. He said, I've commanded a widow to provide for you. So he obeyed. When he came, he saw the woman gathering the sticks, and he called out to her and asked for a drink of water. And she was going to go get him the water. He asked her to also bring him some bread that he might eat. Now, she was willing to get the water. That was no problem, to give him a drink. But when he asked for food, she stopped in her tracks and turned to explain to him that she only had enough to feed her and her son, and that was expecting to be their last meal. But God had told Elijah that he had commanded the widow to provide for him. And this woman did not seem to be aware of it at all. But you know, in Proverbs 21:1, it says, the king's heart is in the hands of the Lord. As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. So if he can turn the hearts of a king any way he wants, then he can work on a widow's heart and help her to be willing to obey and do as Elijah asked. So in the 13th verses, it begins to say, then Elijah said to her, do not fear. Go, do as you have said, but make me a little bread cake from it first, and bring it out to me, and afterward you may make one for yourself and for your son. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor shall the jar of oil be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth. So she went and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and he and her household ate for many days. And the bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord which he had spoke through Elijah. Now notice here how God didn't fill the jar with oil, nor the barrel with flour. He could have filled 10 jars of oil. He could have filled 10 barrels with flour. But he didn't do that. Why? There was a famine in the land. And here a little widow woman and her son, if it had been noised abroad that she had these supplies, she could have been attacked and even killed for those supplies. But God made sure that every meal that she served, there was just enough for her and her son. He knew exactly the situation. He knew how to fulfill the need of her, and as she was feeding Elijah also, he knew how to do this. So you think, well, God was just going to fill that barrel. No, he kept it from being empty. He kept the jar from being empty. He kept the barrel from being empty. And that's what we need to do in our lives. It helps us to grow in our faith, grow stronger. And when we know him as our provider, then we don't panic when we can see the bottom of the barrel or when we can see the emptiness of the jar. We just know that he's going to provide. And that gives us strength to hold on to him, just the way this little widow woman was obeying Elijah. We're not told of how the period of time that passed between this miracle to when the widow's son became sick and died. But she immediately went looking for Elijah. In verse 17, it said, and now it came about after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became sick. And his sickness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. So she said to Elijah, what do I have to do with you, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my iniquity to remembrance and to put my son to death. And he said to her, give me your son. Then he took him from her bosom and carried him up to the upper room where he was living and laid him on his own bed. I think that maybe Elijah might have been as surprised as she was at this turn of events. Here he was, he had gone to this town where God had told him to go and that this widow would provide for him, and everything was going good. They had enough to eat. They had, they were being provided for. And then all of a sudden, this terrible thing happened. So here was a time that Elijah's faith might have been at risk. It was tested, at least, when he saw, he didn't understand. So he took the child with him and he put it up on his bed, and he called to the Lord and said, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought calamity to the widow with whom I am staying by causing her son to die? Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and called to the Lord and said, O Lord my God, I pray thee, let this child's life return to him. And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child returned to him, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house and gave him to his mother. And Elijah said, See, your son is now alive. So there are many times that we don't understand, and but God worked 2 miracles for this widow woman. She said, Then the woman said to Elijah, Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word the Lord is in your mouth, and it is truth. So these events brought the truth of who God was to Elijah and to this widow woman. This widow woman could go far from this time with the assurance that God being her provider, as well as God restored life to her son. Now, I didn't know, me and Jerry was talking about the time limit, and I thought, I don't have enough, but I have what I have. But anyway, we could learn 4 things at least from this lesson. First, obedience to God brings blessings. We always know when we obey God that things are going to turn out good. It's only when we try to change things, or when we get stubborn and say, I thought to myself, well, I'd probably been one of those that said, why did you let the brook dry up? Why are you sending me somewhere else? Why didn't you do that? But he just simply obeyed. And obedience brings blessings. So when you feel like God is telling you something and leading you somewhere, just do it. Just obey, and then you will receive the blessing. It said God often uses unlikely people and resources to accomplish his purposes. And that's so true. All through the Bible we see that. He used a Virgin Mary to give birth to Jesus Christ. That was not no one would have thought of that. But that's what happened. And he did so many things. He used just plain water to turn water into wine at the marriage supper of the Lamb, or at the marriage supper that he went to before he was crucified. And all these things that he did, and we don't understand, but he uses unlikely people and resources to accomplish his will. It doesn't have to be. One thing I've thought of so many times, that if Jesus had been born in a castle, if he had been born in the finest place and, with all that, the shepherds wouldn't have been allowed to go see him. They would have been, they would smell like sheep. They'd been among the sheep herders and stuff, and they wouldn't have been allowed to go in. He wouldn't have been a common man. He wouldn't have been, God used that. He knew exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it. So God often uses unlikely people and resources. All we have to do is yield to him and let him do what he will. And God's mercy extends to all people. This little widow woman was a Gentile. When she spoke to Moses, she said, or to Elijah, she said, your God. It wasn't her God, but it was his God. He said, your God. But she learned to know, by this experience, that he was the one true God and who he was. But his mercy extends to all people. He extended his mercy to this little woman twice that we hear of in this story, and how wonderful it is. So he doesn't, it doesn't pick and choose. He loves all. He means all. And the 4th one, it said, all God requires of us is to trust him and have faith in him. He doesn't need our advice. He doesn't need us to say, well, wouldn't it be better if we did this? Or, let's do it this way. No, he just wants you to trust and obey. There's an old song that says, trust and obey. There's no other way. To trust and obey is what he's asked us to do. And that's all that we need to do. But when we taste and see that the Lord is good, when we look at how he uses things that we wouldn't think of using, but it turns out to be the best way, the best thing, the best way that we could do it. That's what God did in this widow's life in this time. So there were many trials and tribulations. That wasn't all. Elijah had to go on, and he had to face Ahab, and they, did many things. But this period of time, I think he was as greatly blessed as this little widow woman. And like I said, he could have questioned, well, why are you sending me to her? She needs looking after, and here I am taken from her. But God knew what he was doing. We need to remember that God doesn't make mistakes, that he knows how to do it, knows why to do it, and all he asks is for us to trust and obey. So this week, as you learn and listen to the lessons, just remember, we're tasting and seeing the goodness of God and how wonderful he is, and know that he's the God of more than enough. He may not give us a whole barrel full at a time. He may not pile it on all at once. He may not show us the plan from here to there all at once, but just knowing that one step at a time that he's with us and that we can trust and depend on him. And that's all I have tonight. God bless you.